discussion webinar organized by the Center for Comparative and International Taxation. Ms. Kriti Chawla is a tax professional who will be moderating the session with me today. Our speakers for the evening are Mr. Rajat Bose and Ms. Shohini Bhattacharya. Mr. Rajat Bose is a partner at Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, who specializes in indirect tax and customs advisory and litigation. His focus is on tax planning, advisory, and litigation support services in the area of GST, customs, excise, VAT laws, and foreign trade laws. He is well recognized in the industry as one of the thought leaders on GST laws and has successfully advised various domestic and multinational clients on implementation and transition issues relating to GST. He is also a part of various expert committees of business chambers on GST. Ms. Shohini Bhattacharya is an associate at Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, specializing in indirect tax and international trade law. They will be discussing their article titled Goods and Services Tax. Is the time ripe for tax slab rationalization in today's webinar? Thank you, sir and ma'am, for joining us today. If you could discuss your article with the participants in the meeting.
So,
Sure, thanks, Niharika. Sorry. So let me just sort of set the context over here, and then probably Shohini can take it from there. So the thought process behind this article was that since we've now already 4 years into uh, the implementation of GST, and we've seen many sort of changes happen over the last 4 years. Some good, some not so good, but because it's a new law and is what happens with any kind of new legislation, there are always challenges and we sort of learn on the job. So one of the issues which we thought was relevant and where the government should really focus on in the coming couple of years is on the uh, reduction of uh, slabs for various goods and services. So we did some sort of research on this topic, and we realized that India is one of the few countries in the world which has so many rates of which has so many tax slabs. Having said that, this discussion was also there was a discussion on the rationalization of tax slabs way back in 2017 or late 17 or early 18. And at that point of time, the then finance minister, Mr. the late Arun Jaitley, had mentioned that you can't tax um, milk and cars in the same bracket. While that is a very very fair statement to make, but if you look at the whole scheme of GST and the entire compliance um, framework, uh, the various exemptions, concessions, cess, so on and so forth, it just makes you know doing business very very cumbersome for some of the not so large traders and businesses. Also, we felt that uh, by reducing the tax slabs, there is also a case for improving compliances, for improving the level of, um, you know, the improving the collections, tax collections, as well as increasing the tax base. So, with that thought, we sort of wrote this paper, which you very kindly published in your inaugural tax blog, and we are very thankful to JGLS for giving us this opportunity. With that, I'll sort of leave it to Rohini for taking it further from here. Thank you. Over to you, Shohini.
thank you, Rajat. Yes, pretty much briefed the entire paper. So, we have actually divided the paper in three broad categories. Firstly, we'll speak about what is going on in India. Then the second part deals with what is going on in other parts of the world who has a similar taxation, GST or VAT, but a similar tax structure. And then we'll see that how we are lagging behind, what good practices we can pick up, and how can we make the GST better for us. So, starting with GST, of course, we know. So, it's it has been implemented in 2017, but uh, India started preparing for it way back than that, maybe like 10, 15 years back, where then everything sorted, and then it was implemented in 2017 July. That is when we started paying GST. So the main purpose of GST was to bring all the taxes. So there we had lot many taxes, sales tax, and we had excise, and then we had service tax, and those were being collected by different levels of the government, and there was no uniformity in that. So to bring it to at one place, and so we introduced GST. Now in GST we have either we pay CGST or SGST, or otherwise we pay IGST, and it's a dual system, so it gets divided between the state and the center. So yeah, so this is how. And then on every consumption we have to pay GST at a rate which has been specified. Now these rates, so there we have usually have five tax slabs. So any good or service can come under any of that tax slab. So we have to go back to the HSN code, see what good or service it is, then we see what tax it is, and it is changing very rapidly. The tax rates are also changing. So we have to make sure that okay, it was 5% before, but maybe it's 10% now or 12%, or and it keeps on changing, it becomes a very big problem for the compliances. And we cannot do away with so many tax slabs that easily because of the socioeconomic disparity that we have. There is a big large gap between among all the level of populations we have poor people for whom we, so he just told that we cannot tax milk, but then we have to tax it at some rate. So we have a lower tax slab for that, and for the luxury goods we have higher tax slabs like 28% or 18%, I'm sorry, and things like that. So we have five different tax slabs, which is also very important for our country given the disparity. And it's very high also, 28%. It's nowhere in the world there is this uh, tax rate, which is also recognized by the World Bank also, that India has maximum tax rates and maximum tax slabs both. Right. So, looking at the countries that, such as Singapore, it's a very good economy to take an example of, and it has just a single slab. So everything gets taxed at 7%, say, right? And you don't have to think about, so if whenever you are consuming anything, you can just tax it at 7%. Compliances become very easy because you don't have to look for what tax slab, what code it has, and compliances become very easy. And then what the good thing they did was, when the GST was introduced, they promised the citizens that they won't increase the tax in next 5 years, and it was very well taken by the citizens. So next, there are other countries also like New Zealand. They also have a very similar structure. Then let's say other developing countries. But when we see at the European or the developed countries like France, so France has five tax slabs, and then Brazil also follows that, and European Union also has a very extensive tax system to follow. Now, if we see that all the developing countries with the newer GST regime has simplified tax structure, than what is there in old GST systems like in Europe, France, and those countries were very well developed and they are equipped enough to be taxing at such a rate. And if we compare, we see that India is actually lagging behind, given it is taxing things at 28%, right? And we are doing away with the 28% slab. There are very minimal goods and services now which are taxed at 28%, and it has positively impacted our economy also. So if you see in last years, every month we were breaking the record of GST collections, like it was at least for many months, like 6 or 7 months consecutively, it was we were collecting more than 1 lakh crores, right? And this was going with the reduction in slabs and the rates. So we cannot say that if there is a lower tax, the revenue collection also becomes lower, because if you have less tax slabs and lower rates, people will be motivated to pay tax, because they really, no one wants to get into the problem of not paying tax, then the department visiting and all those audits. So yes, so this is how so we are coping up with the 4 or 5 tax slabs now, and let's see how it goes, because we are still in the process. If I have missed anything, you may please.
No, thanks, Shoini, for capturing the gist of the article so well. Um, as you've rightly pointed out, there is a case for reducing the number of these slabs of taxation, but uh, it's of course, India. We have to keep in mind the demographies of our country, and the fact that Singapore or New Zealand or any of these countries are much smaller in size. Probably there is not such a big gap between the rich and the poor like we have in our country. So of course, demographies, political considerations, social considerations, all these things needs to be kept in mind while fixing the tax slabs. And it's not an easy job. Of course, India is a country which is so diverse, so unique, with which has so many different types of products, so many indigenous goods, that it becomes really difficult for anybody to sort of put it in particular tax brackets. So it is a tedious job, it's a thankless job, and no matter how much we try and criticize the current system of multiple tax slabs, but somewhere down the line we'll have to also um, be cognizant of the fact that probably that was the only way out in 2017 for bringing in GST. But yes, as we mature, as the system gets more matured, as we as the taxpayer become more conversant with the rules and regulations of GST, and that's why we feel that probably right now it's the right time that we can bring in some radical changes in the tax structure as far as GST is concerned. So happy to take questions from Kriti or anyone else. And let's see if we can. I mean, we'll try and answer it to the best of our abilities. Obviously, we also don't have answers to many of the questions, but be happy to um, answer whatever we can to the best of our abilities.
Thank you so much. So this has been very insightful for all of us, a good read for all of us, in fact. And we sort of agree that GST is far from perfect as of now, and so much can be done to improve it going forward. But on a whole, I think it's so much better than all the multiple taxes that we had in the past, like the VAT, service tax, etc. Um, Considering the complexities that we have right now in the GST system, do you think that the mandate of ease of doing business in India has been achieved?
Mm, Again, that's see, if you compare it to what where we were before 2017, definitely I would say yes.
Hmm.
We have been able to achieve more than what we probably would have thought that we could. But the way things are changing in the world, we live in such a dynamic environment where we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and there are so many new products and services in the market. For example, cryptocurrencies is one, gaming industry is one. These are the things which were never thought of before. And as in when the economy evolves, there is going to be more such kind of goods and services which will come, which probably we can't imagine as of now. So I think that keeping that in mind, uh, there is of course a lot that we can achieve still, and therefore it's necessary that we become an economic community which is welcoming for the international investors. And one of the things where when anybody is investing into the country, they look at the compliance framework very closely, as well as they also give a lot of weightage to how friendly are the tax authorities. And we've not had a very great past record, to be very honest. In fact, we are all aware as to how we've gone on to do retrospective amendments in tax laws, even after the Supreme Court has held something to be not taxable, specifically in relation to the Kane transaction. As you're all aware, that we sort of negated the Supreme Court ruling by getting by bringing in retrospective amendments, which is never a good practice. But unfortunately, that's how the country is. And if we have to sort of instill that confidence in the international investors, then we have to have a more friendlier taxation regime than what we have today.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. So, you've talked about making the tax system friendlier. So, do you think that, lower taxes, they encourage compliance, leading to greater revenue for the government, while higher taxes, they fuel rash or evasive behavior?
Naturally, Niharika, the thing is that, and it's a proven study. In fact, this kind of study has been done many times in many countries, where in fact, even if you know that at one point of time in India, the income tax rate was 90%. And that was close to in the 1950s or 1960s, when the income tax rate was 90%. And at that point of time, black money, I mean, there was so much, the evasion was so rampant. In fact, even I would not pay 90% if I had to pay 90% income tax. Why should I pay 9 rupees out of 10 to the government when I'm not getting the kind of facilities which the government should actually provide? So you'll have to also see that, as long as you keep the rates at a reasonable level, one doesn't mind paying. I mean, today, you know, if you, let's say, you go to a restaurant and the GST rate is 5%, you don't mind paying that, because at the end of it, you know that that money is going to go towards social welfare and towards infrastructure development, so on and so forth. But uh, you'll also feel a pinch when, let's say, because we are an aspirational economy, we are constantly trying to sort of buy better clothes, better cars, better accessories, gadgets, etc. And in that process, if you start taxing these luxury and luxury goods, which the government claims to be sin goods, I don't know why, but I don't think these are sin goods. I think these are, yes, luxury goods, but not, definitely not sin goods. We are not doing a sin by buying a car or anything like that. If we can afford it, of course we should buy it. But when you are asked to pay a GST of 50% on a luxury vehicle, that is where it actually pinches. And I feel that, if you, a lot of times that can be a consideration as well, because at the end of it, uh, I don't get an input tax credit of that 50%, do I? buy. So that's a cost for me because I'm an end consumer. I'm not using it for business purposes. And even if I'm using for business, there is a restriction. You can't take credit of motor vehicles. So again, that 50% will pinch me if I'm to today, if I want to buy a luxury vehicle. So I will think twice that why should I pay 50% GST on a luxury vehicle, um, whereas I can buy a not so good vehicle and pay a lower level of GST because the cess rates, etc., might be lower in that case. So I feel that yes, as and again, to give you another example, tobacco sector in India is one of the most highly taxed sectors, and in tobacco sector, the level of evasion is the highest in amongst all sectors combined. In fact, I've worked in the past, in the recent past, with an association which manufactures tobacco, and the data when they shared with me was really surprising and shocking for me to see that the because the level of taxes, if you see, because it's a there is a embargo on taking of input tax credit at certain level, the eventual tax rate on tobacco is as high as about 266%. And because it's so high, the evasion is so rampant, and what that also means is that there is a lot of spurious tobacco which is there in the market. There is a lot of tobacco which is in the gray market, which is not branded, so on and so forth. So I genuinely feel that we if we sort of bring the level of GST at more reasonable level, it will definitely mean more compliance. It will definitely mean more collections, and for sure, it will it will help a long way in helping the business community in doing ease of business in India.
Okay, so thank you. So now I wanted to ask you, like, it's been 4 years since the GST system was introduced in India. So what changes do you propose in the current system? I mean, it's a very heavy question and there are a lot of changes, I think. But what would you think are the first and foremost changes that need to be made?
Uh, Again, when you say changes, what do you mean immediately, or do you mean in the over the next 4 years? Because there you have to put it in different buckets. Some changes are required immediately. Some changes may take a bit more time. But generally speaking, I think there's a need to firstly uh, bring in certain clarifications on a few aspects which are really bothering the industry. One, of course, is on the mismatch of input tax credits because of the vendors not filing their returns on time, or if they're sort of not paying the GST, etc. I think that's a little draconian to my mind, because you really cannot put the onus on an honest taxpayer to ensure that his or her supplier is also paying the tax and also sort of filing the returns. So that is a little draconian to my mind, and definitely you need to change it urgently. Of course, there's various litigations across various high courts and Supreme Court on this exact issue, but that is one thing which needs to change as soon as possible. Another thing which I think needs to really be looked at is the way investigation, search, and seizure, etc., is conducted right now. I feel that we need a sort of a framework or a definitive sort of guideline as to how the authorities will conduct search, seizures, and investigations under GST. I have seen far too many cases of high-handedness on the part of the GST officials. They coerce companies into making payment of taxes with the threat of attachment of bank accounts, and they issue summons left, right, and center to the topmost management, the CEOs, and the directors. This practice is not very healthy. It needs to stop. There has to be a line drawn somewhere that what you can and what you cannot do. As a matter of fact, even in case of a criminal proceeding against any individual. The CRPC lays down guidelines as to how a police can act, what they can do, what they cannot do. There are guidelines that they cannot enter a woman's house after, after sunset, so on and so forth. But there is nothing like that in GST. And I have seen, senior women officials of companies being harassed and kept in office till 3, 4 in the morning by the GST officials, for during the time when they conduct raids and searches in the premises. So this definitely needs to be streamlined, and it needs to be streamlined in a very, very urgent um, fashion. Um, and that's also because in a lot of international companies, they really do not appreciate this kind of behavior from the GST officials. 10, 12 of them come, land up in your office very one fine day, and then they'll start, they'll stop all your work and ask you to gather in a boardroom or something, and then just keep you there for the next 12, 13 hours. So this is something which needs to stop. So that's number two, immediate requirement. Number three, there are again a lot of small niggling issues which are there, like inverted duty structures and the issue of GST on ocean freight and issues like that. But that is something which, of course, in due course of time, whether it's through the through the courts or through legislative changes, that will ultimately get settled. But that is what I feel in the short term. These two things are very important to be addressed.
Well, I think I strongly agree with you on an immediate level. The mismatches really, it's really taxing the business community, increasing the compliance costs as well. So yes.
Okay, so you've talked about products which have a very, very high rate of taxation, like the tobacco industry. But on the other hand, there are also some products like natural oil which are completely outside the purview of GST right now. So, do you think that it is feasible to impose a tax on such products which would actually regulate a hike in prices?
See, I am a very strong advocate of least exemptions possible. And the reason is that as soon as you give an exemption to any goods or service, there is a break in the input tax credit chain, which is again something which is not desirable in an ideal taxation system. I feel that if there should be only a very limited number of sectors which should be exempt. Of course, education and health are two sectors which I strongly believe should not have any GST. In fact, not only at their output, but even on their input side also, there should be a complete exemption to the in the entire value chain. So education and health should of course be free, and education I think should not be restricted only to primary, secondary, or whatever. Even education at the graduation or post graduation level should be exempt. Even vocational training should be exempt. There should not be any GST on such kind of activities. But apart from that, there are various other goods, like you mentioned, oil, natural oil. That's what you said, no? So I don't know why there is an exemption for that. I seriously don't understand. You can really, you can tax it at 5%. I don't think anybody would mind paying that, as long as your input tax credits are allowed. That I think should is how um, you know um, things should be going forward.
Okay. So, following that, you mentioned that you agree that education and health are the two sectors where exemptions should be granted. So, right now, keeping in mind COVID-related materials such as medicines and oxygen concentrators and other relief items, so there was a reduction in GST on them. So, do you think that the relief was sufficient, or there should have been more of an exemption granted?
So I think that what they really did was they reduced the rate of GST. They haven't exempted it, but they've reduced it to 5%. Again, the logic over there is that they don't want to break the input tax credit chain, and that's why they've kept it at 5%. However, I feel that the calculation might be a little miscalculated in this case by the government. If you look at how And one of the in fact, in one of the press conferences, it was also mentioned that how do we ensure that the benefit is being passed on to the consumers. I think that was, to my mind, a very naive statement to be made by the revenue secretary during the press conference, because you clearly have provisions under the GST law where you can ensure that the benefit of reduction in tax rates is passed on to the consumers by way of anti-profiteering measures. Anyhow, so I feel that they should be completely exempt, because at a time when we need vaccines, and it needs to be administered to each and every citizen of this country, you can't really have a GST rate on the vaccines as of now. Of course, later on, once things improve, once the pandemic is over, you can bring back the GST levy. But the need of the hour is that you need to make vaccines available at cheaper rates to everyone, and that's what the endeavor should be. And whatever needs to be done for that, if it means that you have to forego some revenue, so be it.
Okay, thank you. So due to pandemic, what do you think are the further reliefs that the government should grant for the revival of trade and industry? Because there's been a lot of impact on because of the pandemic.
Okay. No, so I think one is, of course, there are a few sectors like hospitality is one which is suffering, and it's bleeding really. It's some, I don't know how they're sustaining themselves. Yesterday, I read a news report saying that 1 in 4 restaurants have shut down because of the pandemic. So I don't know really what these guys, it means. Of course, loss of so many jobs and livelihood. Um, Also, there are certain other sectors which are suffering, like auto sector is really in a bad shape right now. Um, but the thing is that they can't do anything about it until and unless um, travel resumes, until and unless you start going out of your homes, and having a drink with your colleagues or with your friends in a restaurant. So they really can't do anything about it. That only can happen once the pandemic is over. But once it is over, I'm sure that they can definitely um, get in some positive fiscal measures to ensure that travel is cheaper, to ensure that eating out is cheaper, so that these industries really get a fillip in their development, and in their endeavor to bounce back from this slump. But yes, apart from that, I really feel that they should make internet cheaper, because we're spending so much time at homes on internet, doing video calls, and my bills are going through the roof. So I really feel that we should make internet taxed at 5% only. And yeah, apart from that, I think all the OTT platforms should get cheaper. Since after 10 o'clock till about 2 o'clock, that's all what you guys are doing. Definitely, my associate Shohini, she starts at 8 and she finishes at 3, I think, in the morning. So OTT platforms should get cheaper, 5% GST on that. Yeah, so maybe some relief on that will be good from the government.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful.
So I think with this we've come to an end to the question and answer session. If somebody from the audience has further questions, I would request them to put their questions in the chat box. Thank So Shohini ma'am, according to Sir, he doesn't really believe in a lot of exemptions. But do you think exemption of goods is a solution to tax wars and tax problems?
So it will, I think it will of course break the chain of input tax credit, which is a very big problem for people in the business who really want to take some credit, who are giving output supplies which are exempted. But what is the point? Because all their credit is getting wasted, and the benefit of the exemption really doesn't stand true at the end of the scenario when it goes through the entire supply chain. So exemptions, I don't even, we have written this in the paper also, that one way of reducing one slab is to bring all exempted products to a 5%, not all, but yes, some products to 5% tax rate. So, and even if we see the COVID problem, so the equipments were taxed at 5% from whatever it was, 12 or 18 in the past. And industry really did not oppose that. They understood that exemption is not going to solve the problem for us, and there came up a suggestion that they should be taxed at zero rated. Zero rated is where you don't have to pay tax, but then you get the input tax. So that is one solution. But exemption, I agree with what Rajat said, that it is.
Niharika, you're asking an associate if she agrees or not with a partner. I think that's a very wrong way to start start things. Of course, she will never disagree with me. So you should ask her this question when I'm not online.
Or the
Right.
other way around.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so also, your paper talks about countries which have relatively new GST tax systems, and how you say that we should countries which have a new tax system, and particularly developing countries, they should have fewer tax slabs. So do you think that India should have also had a fewer tax slabs, keeping in mind that it's newly introduced?
We can of course have US tax slab, but like you said, we are a very big country with lot of population to take care about. There are richer people, there are poor people, and if we start taxing milk or sugar and things like that at 10%, and just say that we have just this tax slab and do whatever you want, but this is the 10% you have to pay on everything, no one is going to agree. It works in Singapore because most of the people are rich. Their economy is really doing fine, and one of the best economies in the country. But we really, it is very, very difficult to replicate the entire project in India, given the
No,
scenario.
the idea over here, I feel, Shoini, is not that to have one single rate, but yes, not have five rates either. So I
Yeah.
think what we can do is that we can have two rates probably. One which is around 7-8%, and the other which is around 16 odd percent, so that uh, you can have that kind of differentiator depending upon what kind of commodities you are selling. Of course, milk and sugar is something which probably everybody in this country would consume. And there also, there are categories. There are branded milk, there are unbranded milk, there is of course subsidized milk, so on and so forth. Now if you go to a rural area, they won't be having packaged milk. They will probably be having unbranded milk right from the source. So there, of course, there cannot be any GST on that. But yes, I think, as you rightly pointed out, uh, because of various factors, political, social, demographical, it's not, it wouldn't have been a good idea to have only two or lesser slab rates when we started off. And possibly this is the only way we could have got the consensus amongst each and every state to introduce GST. So as a starting point, it was perfectly fine. But now, as we have evolved and as we are, in this 4 years into this journey, um, we should definitely think of reducing the rates of taxes, the slabs of taxes.
Thank you, ma'am and sir. Um, so, Professor Dhani Nekar has a question. She wants to ask if exemption to sanitary napkins was granted owing to the fact that they are a necessity and not a luxury. Can the same analogy be applied for the COVID products? which are merely subject to a rate reduction but not complete exemption, considering that they are a necessity too in the current times.
Absolutely. I think this is also what I also mentioned earlier, that right now, we have to look at what is the need of the hour, and the need of the hour is an exemption. And if it means foregoing revenue, so be it. It has to be. There is no, there cannot be any other way. Um, and once things are better, once we are out of the pandemic, you're free to levy 5% GST if you want to. At that point of time, nobody is stopping you. But right now, looking at, we are a country of 1.4 billion people, and everybody needs to be vaccinated. And at this point of time, you cannot be thinking of levying GST on vaccines. It's ridiculous completely. You should exempt it. No question about it.
Thank you, sir, for addressing that question. So, since there are no more questions from the audience, I think we've come to an end of the session today. I would like to present the vote of thanks for the webinar. I would like to thank Mr. Rajat and Ms. Shohini for joining us in the discussion today and giving us their valuable time and knowledge. It has been a very insightful discussion on taxation, and we look forward to having you with contribute to our blog and have conversation with us in the future as well. I would like to thank the Advisory Council at the Tax Terminal for organizing the session and for inviting the speakers today. I would like to thank Ms. Kriti for moderating the session with me. And lastly, I would like to thank all the participants present today for making this event a success. And we look forward to having such insightful events in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you so
us.
much.